Okay, we are live now. Let's see. Let's wait for people to join in. Oh, we have people joined in. So, hey everyone, thank you for joining us here today again. Before we start the session, do you guys want to let us know in the comments where all of you are from, what state and what GDC chapter? Okay, we'll wait for people to join in again. We'll just give another minute before we start the session. So, thank you for joining us here. Ontario, we have Ricky Dodd from Ontario. Hey Ricky, thank you for joining us. We're so excited to have you here. And who else do we have here? Okay, so we can get started. So as you guys might know, from last 2 weeks ago, we had a session about how we can brainstorm and get some ideas for our digital product. So this week we'll learn about how we can move forward with those ideas and try to like turn it into a digital product that sort of we can learn from it and apply it for the solution challenge. And before we start, we can just introduce ourselves. I'm Sahil Rana, and I'm the GDSE lead at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. And Mike and Bryce, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. I'll go first. My name's Mike Wolfson. I am an Android Google developer expert, currently living in Phoenix, Arizona, and I graduated from Colorado State.
That's a pretty impressive resume there. I am also a Google developer expert for web technologies and product back when there was a product category. I have a graphic design degree from the University of Minnesota, which is part of the reason that we're both here.
Yep.
So I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, folks, for coming. I know that many of you folks weren't here last week, at least live. Hopefully you were able to watch the video and catch up on the presentation. If not, we'll do a quick overview of what we're here for over the whole session, what we did last week, and then we'll move forward into our content for this week. So go ahead, Bryce.
Well, cool. So like Mike said, this is session number 2 in a 3-part series. We're talking about how to make products from idea to something real that you can actually get people to use and interact with. Last time, we talked about where the ideas come from, how we participate in brainstorming, and we looked at a specific idea that we're going to kind of follow throughout this series with the idea that we'd like to make a product around it. Typically, Mike and I would introduce ourselves at this point, but since you already heard who we are and you can see our pictures, that probably doesn't get you very far. So instead, maybe what we should do is talk a little bit about what we did in our last session, which was we introduced Mike's fun collection hobby to the world. Mike, do you want to tell us a little bit about what we're looking at here?
Sure, will do. The one thing I want to do before I mention that is just one more thing I wanted to mention about our sessions is the stuff we're communicating today is good for hackathons and if you folks are working together in school and for other things. But this is based on actual real world experience, and these are the real world things we do as product influencers and people in our organization working through product. These are real practical things that you will use in the real world. This is not just something that has some simple ideas. Also, the ideas we're presenting are nothing super unique or special. This is just standard procedures that everybody in the industry uses to move product forward.
Yeah, these are tried and true practices. You might hear of it called something like design thinking. You may hear of things like agile. Those are all like kind of pieces of this bigger idea. And our goal is really to build something that has a space that it can live in the world and a problem it can solve.
Alrighty, so the last little bit of recap that we wanted to do was discuss the problem that we had come up with, and that is Pez collections. Hopefully everybody in the room knows what a Pez dispenser is, and you should, because the company sells 70 million Pez dispensers every year, so they're not something unique or special. They're really widely adopted in the world. Basically, Pez dispensers are little candy devices with plastic dispensers with character heads on them that people collect. And the fun thing about collecting these is they don't cost very much money, and it's impossible to have a complete collection because there's so many. I just mentioned 70 million of them. It's the kind of thing that you could almost never complete a full collection because there's so many. The nature is, because there's so many, it's super difficult to know what is available, what part of your collection is complete or not. And that's the problem statement that we're going to address. Once we can address this statement of how to identify missing dispensers in a collection, we can then work on some of the other bigger problems, or not bigger problems, but things that work for a company, like selling those dispensers back to the user and making it easier for them to fulfill their collection.
So, and something we worked on during our last session was brainstorming. We arrived at this. How do I know what's missing in my collection? As sort of a piece of the problem that we wanted to address, right? So we did a little exercise with sketches and Sharpies. Anybody who doesn't know, I'm a huge Sharpie fan. Probably should buy stock at some point. But this idea that collectors have large collections and they don't know what they're missing is sort of where we narrowed our focus from the last time. So what that means is that we actually we need to kind of do a takeoff of what Mike just said. This initial requirement is that collections are huge, and it's really hard to know what Pez dispensers are out there and what's left. So that's kind of the problem that we're going to attack throughout our conversation today. And this is the part where we kind of have to get some ideas for how we might go about that process.
So one thing worth mentioning here, and this is a nice bridge from our last meeting. In our last meeting, we did some brainstorming and we went through some active exercises where we would, as a group, go totally crazy and think of any idea we could think of regarding the task at hand. At this point, we have refined those ideas and gone through them as a group to figure out the ones that we think are going to be the real meat of the matter and the ones that we can actually start working through. This isn't now where we're time to be creative and kind of think about all sorts of crazy ideas. At this point, we're going to start to figure out which of those ideas are going to be the right ones to work on.
Should we bring the other guys on and see if they've got some specific ones that they want to chat about? Yeah, feel free to join, guys. I can share the one that I thought about or felt like it had the most impact was the idea of.
I think we should let them share first.
Okay, yeah.
So that,
go for it.
I think that the app could have something where users could upload either images of their collections or pieces of collections that they already know exist. And that way other users can see if they have parts that they didn't even know existed in the collection that they're looking for. So almost like a peer-to-peer sharing that can create its own database.
Yep. And along with that, if you want to like automate the process, like have the app try to like figure out itself based on the user input what collection does the dispenser belong to, we can have like some neural network models that tries to like identify based on the image of the best dispenser that has been uploaded by the user and automatically like put it in the collection or the best dispenser library, and helps us automatically like sort out the different best dispensers the users have uploaded, and that will make it much more easier and it will automate the process.
I would really like to point out that we told these guys that we wanted them to have ideas. We did not say which ones we wanted, but the ideas that I think that we felt like had the most legs in this process kind of all fit around that same idea of, maybe pictures of what's in your collection or self-identification, things like that. Possibly even going as far as like an augmented reality thing where I could see the holes in my collection with camera. Mike has some ideas around that too.
Bryce, did you have a different plan than idea? Because I do. So we definitely thought through the ideas that you guys were proposing, which actually have some technical challenges, right? Image classification is not easy. Creating the data set is not easy, although
let's go through those. Let's go through those further on, because I think
sure. Before we do that, I did want to propose my solution, which was complete manual operation where you would have just a list of the dispensers that are available, and then you could just manually go in and click through to self-identify just for yourself to create your collection. I just want to present that as an alternative because I want to be able to, throughout our decision-making process, what we're going to do today, I want to be able to balance the impossible versus the possible.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, Mike, because I think there are a lot of things in the world where people built maybe the wrong thing for very, very good reasons, and yet it's there. It's in the world. I know you and I have been in tech for a long time. We've probably seen a lot of these things. I'm guessing a lot of the people watching have seen a lot of these things. You have any specific examples you want to talk about? I really do love this one.
I do love this one, and I hope it's obvious for everybody looking at this screen why a grass-colored golf ball might not be the best tool to use for this particular job.
I mean, the only thing that I can think of that would be better would be maybe like a watercolored golf ball.
That is assuming that the job of this golf ball is playing golf. Perhaps there is a different need for that. But the reason that we give this example is at some point, someone did create this product. I'm sure it cost a whole bunch of money to create this golf ball. And there should have been many steps in the process where people decided that this was not the best solution for the job at hand.
Yeah, I mean, if the whole point is a ball you can hit with a club, it still works. It just this maybe changes the way you play the golf game a little bit. And so we're showing this because we want people to stop and take a step back here, and we really want you to start to pay attention to these things. That there's a long list of stuff that we don't know, right? So we came up with these ideas, but there are a bunch of pieces inside of that we can't answer, right? And everybody's product bumps into this at some point. So the question then is kind of, well, what do you do with that information? I know that I have questions. I'm a little stuck. I might have questions about the technology. I might have questions about the actual value and the use case. But we've kind of got to go through these things, right? We've got to come up with. Last time we talked about something called a job to be done. Like, does the thing we're proposing actually solve the job to be done? Is it something that people will use, right? Or is it, did we come up with a problem that doesn't actually exist? I have a graphic design degree, and I have a professor years ago who would walk up to the board. We'd have all of our posters or whatever it was laid out for critique. He'd stand there for a couple seconds and kind of scratch his chin and look at them and turn around and say, wow, that is an impressive solution in search of a problem. And it kind of hurt, but he was really prepping us for this idea that just because you can make something, maybe you shouldn't. Other part, can it actually be built, or does it require something that does the technology that you need to build this thing not exist yet? Or does the data that you need to build this thing not exist? And then another kind of a final question that we may not be able to answer in this process, but it's something that we really kind of want you to keep keeping in the back of your heads is that there's a why behind all these things. And that why, in most cases, is divided between either something that you just want to exist in the world, right? You have you see a value in it, and you assume other people would as well, or you'd really love a profit from it. Most things kind of fall into one of those two categories. And so these are things that we're going to kind of try to keep track of as we go through today's session, which we titled Fake It Before You Make It. This is not one of those until things, right? This is actually, we really want you to fake stuff long before you make it. And part of the reason for that is to answer these questions. Part of the other reason for that is so that, well, you don't get a bloody minion. Mike, this thing is impressive. Talk to us about this a little bit.
So, as Bryce was saying, we are here to answer a bunch of questions that we need to learn how we're going to best serve our users, which ultimately will make us develop the best product. And there's going to be lots of different ways that we go about learning how we solve these problems. The other important thing that I want to just reemphasize is this process that we are going through for 3 weeks, and it could take months in a product development cycle. The whole purpose of these exercises we're going through is to answer these problems. Our goal is to answer the problems of what we're building and making sure we're building the right thing. And we're going to keep asking these questions to make sure that by the end, we have answered them correctly. And one of the ways that we're going to figure out if we are building the right thing is to try it out. There's some things you're only going to be able to discover if you actually put the item in front of somebody. And there are different ways that you can do that.
Yeah, Mike, you remember that kids game? I'm guessing you played this as a kid, called Telephone, where everybody sits in a circle and you describe an idea and you pass that idea around the circle. The reason that we need to make things, actually really make things, is sort of twofold, right? One of them is that it gets us moving, right? It creates momentum, and momentum is a good thing. But the other one is that if all I ever did was describe my idea to you, the thing that's in my head will probably never match the thing that's in your head. So we need to make things to actually, instead of telling people, we want to show people. That show over tell will get you more answers and better answers every time. And it'll catch problems. I keep coming back to this little minion soap or shampoo bottle. Simply catching the fact that it had red soap in it, and that might not have been the best color soap to put in this thing. I mean, maybe the whole thing works perfectly if it's white soap, right? Maybe they're tears of joy or something because you got clean hands. But making a physical object lets us start to avoid some of these things as well. So, Mike, I got a question for you, though. I always struggle with this. I think a lot of the people here probably also will struggle with this. What if you and I don't agree on the same problems that we're trying to solve or the same questions that we need answered? Or better yet, this one is always a kicker. What if the VC that you're working with that represents the money doesn't agree that this is what you should be attacking or how you should be fighting through this process? Yeah, I know you've got some tips, but do you want to go through these?
Sure, you bet. So at this point, we really have to identify and make some decisions, right? So we've talked a lot up to this point about some ideas and some cool things that we can do, but this is when the rubber hits the road, and we need to actually make formal decisions that are going to help us move our product forward. And what I wanted to do is run through a very common decision framework that organizations use to help decide things. Deciding things is hard, as Bryce was just saying. Different stakeholders have different needs and have different influence. And it's important that you use processes and plan for those different contingencies so that you can make things happen. Otherwise, you will end up making the wrong decision, or even worse, not deciding anything at all, and that is disastrous. So anyway, we'll go through the simple decision framework. This is pretty common for everything. You may spend more time in certain steps as others, but basically the first step is identifying your goal. I think we have identified that up to this point. We have a pretty clear idea on what we're trying to do with our product. Gather information and start to talk about weighing our options. So at this point, we're going to start to think about the nuances of a full AR-based solution versus something that's more manual, figuring out what will scale better, what will be able to be produced quicker, what we have the expertise for. Also, what is going to be the most exciting, right? We can create something very simple and we can get it done. But if it's not going to be what our users and the community want, then it's not going to get us anywhere. And that kind of is a great segue into number 3. Consider the consequences. So at this point, we're really digging down into ironing out exactly what the responsibility, what the consequences of our solution. Just like I said, if we make the wrong choice and we build a product that nobody wants, we're going to spend a lot of money building a product that nobody wants, and that's not good for anybody. Once you've started to lay some of these things out, you will make your decision, implement things based on that decision, and then evaluate. Something that you're going to hear a few times today and last week, we did 2 brainstorming exercises where we made some decisions and then refined those decisions. Or we refined the ideas, I should say. For decisions, we're going to do a recycling method where we are going to go through and double check if our decisions were good, and then if necessary, pivot and make a different decision.
Yeah, I really want to press on that idea of evaluating your decision. Part of that is based on the goal, but terms that people might hear around this are things like OKRs, which stands for objectives and key results, and KPIs, which are key performance indicators. These are things that these are terms in the product world, but what they really mean are how do you know that the decision you made is actually progressing toward the goal that you have? And one of my tricks for this is actually if you don't know, put a timer on it. Right? Say we're going to do this for another month until we either find out that we're getting an answer to something, or we at the end of that month and we say, you know what, we gotta make a different decision because we're not actually able to prove that we're making progress toward this thing. I read a while ago, I think it was Jason Fried from Basecamp, but he had this idea of you're out on a hike and you know that the path leads to a waterfall, but you come to a branch in the road. Most people at this point hit decision paralysis. They can't make a decision. They know what their goal is. They know what the consequences of not meeting their goal are, right? You probably wander around on your hike for hours and hours and hours on end and get hungry and want to go home. So most people stop there and they just kind of go into panic mode. But if you instead say, you know what, I don't know which path to take. I'm going to flip a coin. But if after the end of 10 minutes, I don't see signs that it looks like I'm going in the right direction, then I stop and I go back to the other path. And that's kind of what we're sort of thinking about here, right? Maybe my sign on my hike is that I'm going downhill. I see a river. I hear the water nearby. If after 10 minutes I'm not seeing any of those things, maybe I back up and try the other path. But the goal here is really to evaluate your decision to such an extent that you know if you should stop and do something different.
So one last thing I wanted to mention on this slide before we move off is this excellent article I found, which discusses some of the additional frameworks you can use that add additional kind of components on top of this basic decision framework I outlined. I'm not going to run through each of them, but I'll just highlight a couple of them to give you an idea of some of the nuances of what the different frameworks provide. For example, integrative thinking is a framework that is designed to allow multiple people's decisions to be integrated together. So instead of just deciding on one best solution, you're focusing on a way where you can use everybody's solution and build towards a consensus. Regret minimization framework, that one kind of, the name is right in there. It says, if we make this decision, what are we going to really regret? What are we going to wish we did differently? And then just one other one is the Eisenhower matrix. This one was named after President Eisenhower, and he used this particular framework to identify the hottest or most important decisions that will impact the product the most, and focus on those decisions first as the most impactful and most important. So depending on what decisions you're trying to make and how they impact your organization moving forward, you may want to add additional framework on top to kind of help you make everybody happy, right? The VC is going to be particularly happy with the regret minimization framework because he or she is the one that's going to have the regrets when the money goes down the tubes.
Right. And something important to remember here too is that these are decision-making frameworks applied to product, but getting good at these, you can apply these to everything in your life, right? Should you go to class or not? Should you buy your significant other that amazing vacation? Should you?
One we were just
Whatever,
talking about
right?
while we were waiting to come on to this presentation is should you take that job offer or pursue that particular with one, which has been interesting on my mind. And Sahil was thinking about that as well. So these decisions that you make are going to be part of your life. So the better you can be about making those things, the better off.
Yeah, so you might as well practice doing it, kind of thing. Okay, so we talked a lot about decisions. We talked a lot about the questions we have. Obviously, everybody is wondering, how do I get to Oz? Wait, that's not what you were wondering, was it? What you're all really wondering is, we keep talking about faking it before you make it. What's that mean? Well, the reason that we put Oz in here, the idea of a not real environment that lets you learn and interact with somebody is kind of the foundation of the Wizard of Oz. It's also how we start talking about things like prototyping. Now, my guess when you hear about prototyping is you're thinking something like these. Right? You're thinking screens that show an interaction. And honestly, that might be what you do. We will show you some tools that will let you do these kinds of things. But a question that I always ask myself is, should we use technology? Could we do something entirely different? I love cardboard, just like I love Sharpies. Mike, you like cardboard? What is it about paper and pens and, I don't know, craft day, if you will? What do you think about that and a prototype? Like, how do you kind of mesh those together in your head?
Well, let's talk about this particular example, which I think is a perfectly great one. Let's talk about building a camera. Let's see if we're building a new digital camera, for instance. There's a lot you can learn by holding the camera and figuring out if it fits right in the hand, if it's going to, the buttons are going to be in the right location. Perhaps we might be better off to have the lens coming out of the bottom, for instance, which would be kind of crazy. But if we're innovating, that's pretty easy to just try, right? When we're just messing with paper and pencil. It's also worth noting that this isn't just for physical products that we're prototyping. Designers and product people use paper all the time, both sketches and also different cardboard pieces of paper. I'll mention that the Google Play product, rest in peace, I guess. Maybe I got to come up with an example of a product that has not gone the way of Spotify. When they were developing their user interface, they used different pieces of paper with pictures of albums on it, and they had people move them around on a table to start to see how people might reorder their catalog. That's way before they created a complicated prototype using some sort of prototyping tool that comes into all sorts of challenges. And they learned a lot from that, and they learned that they maybe were going to not even provide the drag and drop reordering, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, in this example, think about how often somebody picks up the camera and maybe the way everybody holds the camera is they put their hand in front of the lens. Could you have a camera that takes a lot of pictures of hands? Sure, but that might not be what you were going for. The same thing with, I know a lot of people who will make a cardboard interface or a cardboard like an iPad or tablet or phone or whatever it is, and then they'll put their screens inside of that cardboard frame, and they'll look for things like does the location of the in-screen camera cause issues for you? If you put your hand on it the way the normal person holds a phone, does that cover over information that was really important? These are all things that you probably wouldn't actually learn with just an interface prototype. So this is kind of why we're saying to step back and think about what you can prototype and why and how you can do it in a environment that might teach you a lot more. Let's take an example that we didn't really have a good way of prototyping it. So a couple of years ago, a friend of mine and I were working on a phone tree type interface, right? Where we wanted to apply AI to it and have it talk to you and move you through a process and things like that. We were trying to come up with ways to prototype this. So I thought, hey, I'm a technologist. What would be better than building something like Google Assistant and putting it in front of people and letting them mess with it? And I'm thinking about how I could randomize it enough that people might think it was a person, or that it would start to get all this humor and all these kinds of things that we wanted to learn about across. My friend is getting really quiet as I'm going through it. I'm like, man, this is going to be the best voice assistant thingy I've ever built. It'll be amazing. And he just stops and he kind of reaches out in front of the table and he picks up his phone. Like, yeah, I know. It could go on a phone. It'd be even better if it talks to you that way. He goes, no, that's not what I meant. Wait a second, what do you mean? He said, well, what if we just had people call us and we read the options off a script and we figured out how they responded to those things? And I will admit, a tiny little part of me died because I didn't get to do all the cool technology stuff. But future me was really actually quite happy that we went down that route. And the reason for that is I didn't spend all my time building basically what we ended up throwing away. So in many cases, yeah, this is a absolutely beautiful model of a camera. Props to the person that made that. It's got like a little hand strap and everything. That's really cool. But you have to look at these as something that you will probably learn from and get rid of. So that's kind of another reason that we sort of say, hey, let's go kind of low tech on this. Let's kind of step back and see what we can learn.
So you just reminded me of something that actually is a good segue, and it is called the Wizard of Oz method that can be used when you are creating things like a chat bot. And basically what it is on the other end of the chat, you have your user talking to a AI chat bot. On the other end of the display, you have a human. The user doesn't have to know they're not talking to a chat bot, and you can learn a lot more you can learn a lot from with that. And that's called the Wizard of Oz method, which is a cool segue. Worth mentioning that people use cardboard and they can actually become real products, right? Google Cardboard started as a prototype that they were, trying to figure out how they could create some VR goggles on the cheap, it became a real product. Cardboard is very powerful, and at the risk of seeming like a cheerleading team for cardboard, we are going to share one video, mostly just because the video is really cool and it's only 26 seconds. But the nature of why we wanted to share this video is to show how much you can actually do with cardboard if you put your mind to it. Worth mentioning, there's no camera tricks or anything in this video. It's the real robot doing the real things. Yay, cardboard.
That, and just try to get that song out of your, or that 8-bit music out of your head now. Everybody, you're welcome. Mike and I, as far as I'm aware, Mike does not have any stock in corrugated cardboard. I don't either. But it is one of those things that all too often as technologists, we jump to the technology first. And that's kind of what we're trying to say is think about what else you could do. Whoop. All right. There we go. So prototyping tips. We've hit on this idea of think low tech really hard, but ask yourself when you're building a prototype, how much effort do you really have to put in to share your idea? I would caution you to put in just that much effort. Also, use what is already available. Have other people solved parts of the problem that you're trying to work on? Is there a pattern? So we call patterns in design things that are sort of a law or a replicable rule. Is there a pattern for this that you can integrate so that you don't have to teach people how to do parts of your thing? Absolute perfect example of this is, let's say that we end up with this idea that we talked about of like an augmented reality Pez collection integration on my phone. I shouldn't be creating a new interface for that, right? I should use the camera icon. I should use a big window on my phone. I should use all the things that people already know. To go along with that, please, please, please don't prototype things that we already have a very good idea of how they work, right? If the next prototype that I see for a digital product that has a login screen, I'm going to pull what little hair I have left out of my head, because we all know how logins work. Unless your product is reimagining login, skip that. Don't even make it. Don't even show it to people, because once you get rid of that thing, then they can focus on actually giving you feedback on your idea. And then kind of our last tip is you should kind of be resourceful and scrappy when you're making prototypes. And sometimes that means go and find somebody else who made 90% of the thing you want and take it, right? Go and find the stock photography website instead of taking a picture on your own. Go and find the Unity model that represents a human, even if it doesn't represent the exact human that you want as your character. Do whatever you can to take stuff off the shelf and use it so that you don't actually have to worry about sort of that process of how did I get here? How did I make it? Mike, do you have any tips for that?
The one thing I did want to say is, so we've spent a lot of time up to this point figuring out and deciding which of the things we want to work on and which of the things we want to learn about. This is the time where we want to concentrate on making sure that we are actually prototyping for that. What Bryce just said is we're not trying to create a new user interface for lists that is all new and innovative. when we really are focusing on the other nuances. So that makes it really easy because we're not trying to innovate on user interface. We're not trying to create all sorts of custom stuff. We can use a lot of existing patterns, even if our master plan is to create the most innovative list in the world that is critical to our product long term. We don't want to concentrate on that now because that's not the stuff we want to learn about. Well, unless that is what our product is, of course.
In general, that probably isn't what we want to learn about. So, Mike, I realize that we didn't actually put any slides in for this, but this is a great place to talk about it. We have talked a lot about this Pez dispenser problem and the idea that, augmented reality, or I'll take a picture of it and we'll use machine learning and it'll tell me what's there and what's not. These might seem like super simple, easy things. But these are some of the places actually that building a prototype might actually help you answer some things. So I made a statement the other day, and Mike corrected me, as he should have. I said, well, image recognition is kind of a solved problem. And in a lot of cases, it is, right? You can go and run a TensorFlow model that will very helpfully tell me that this is a glass of water, or it'll tell me that it's a glass of clear liquid. You decide if it's water. It'll tell me it's a phone. Mike,
I think that's not
Mike's
water.
with me on this one.
We just learned.
Right. So in my head, I think that image recognition is a solved problem. But I'm guessing, Mike, if I hold up a Pez dispenser in front of my camera, what's it going to tell me?
So it turns out that image classification is in fact a solved problem. Image classification for Pez dispensers is not. What it will tell you is a level of granularity that is not helpful. It may tell you it is a candy dispenser. It may tell you it is a children's toy. It may tell you it's a cigarette lighter. It will not tell you it's a Mickey Mouse Pez dispenser Series A from 1952.
And so if we were to prototype this, right, there are plenty of ways to wire up a machine learning model. It would be wise to prototype this first before we go down too many of these routes. And then we might find that, well, the existing classification doesn't work very well. Well, let's train it with a better model. Obviously, that's the solution, right? But what if the pictures don't exist? Mike, when did you say Pez was invented?
It was, I think they started putting the Pez character heads on in 1957. So over 50 years, actually, I do know that.
I'm guessing that in 1957, they didn't take a picture of every single Pez dispenser they released from every angle.
Right.
Right. So this brings up a problem that we start to learn about if we prototype a machine learning model. And that is, how do we train the data? Where do we get the data? Notice how you can start.
And just to explore this a little further. So I actually did go through this exercise. I guess. There you go. So I grabbed these dispensers. I think there's about a dozen in here, and I took enough pictures from all angles to, understand to the minimum numbers I needed for TensorFlow to be able to classify those images. I ran a classification on those 12 dispensers. I ended up accidentally doing it twice and ended up getting like a $50 Google Cloud bill. So I learned a lot really fast by experimenting with a very small subset to start to learn the solutions to the problems. One thing worth saying is we should probably have multiple paths going. So it's worth having someone looking at the image classification and the AR solution, and another person looking at some alternatives that may allow us to step into AR in the future in a way that is simpler for now.
Well, I think we're pointing out too that a lot of people will talk about this process and they're like, well, you make your prototype as if there's one. There probably is a prototype for all kinds of little things. If we realize that image classification for our problem is going to be an issue, well, how do we get images? how do I convince collectors to submit images of the Pez dispensers they have? Well, that's another thing to prototype. There's all these different pieces around that. And I think it's really important to kind of pay attention to that fact that there's not just a prototype that will solve everything and kind of away you go. So yeah, that's kind of where we're really where we're pushing on this. Be resourceful, come up with ideas, solve problems, and answer the questions that you have. And something I should point out too, a lot of people believe that a prototype fails if they didn't get the answer they were hoping for, right? Like my idea isn't worthwhile because it didn't because the response wasn't what I expected. I would say that is not a failure. I would say that is a very cheap way to learn a very expensive lesson. So remember that you only fail by prototyping when you don't prototype anything. As long as you learn something from it, and as long as you get something back out of it, you do quite a lot. And that sort of segues into, well, what do you do with your prototype? This is one of my favorite parts, actually, the prototyping process. Well, what you do with the prototype is you show it to people, right? You show it to your mom so that you can explain what it is you're working on. You show it to people who might use it so that they can tell you if they would use it, which, by the way, you should be kind of careful of because people will tell you anything to get rid of you. Just keep that in mind. But you should show it to the people who would invest in your idea. You should show it to all kinds of people so they can start to poke holes in it and you can start to learn stuff from it. We kind of stop this process conversation a lot when it comes to prototypes. Instead of thinking about where does it go from here? Who do I show it to? I'm guessing people have a lot of questions around this. This is typically where I know Mike and I mentor startups and teams like that frequently. And I know many of the conversations that I get into are, well, who do I talk to? How do I find them? All kinds of stuff like that. We've got a few tips. Mike, do you have anything that sticks out for that?
No, the one thing worth mentioning is it seems like this is a step that a lot of people skip, especially in large organizations. And this is the most important. It is as important as the other steps we're mentioning. We're doing a lot of these particular things to get to a point where we can really learn. And if you skip these steps, it's very easy to create a design and to have an idea that you think is awesome and is amazing. You really have to expose your ideas to the world to understand if they have any merit.
Yeah, so we put together a couple tips. All the introverts out there, they're like, no, don't make me talk to people. Please don't. Like, I can't handle this. 3 to 5 people actually will get you some meaningful results. Should you do more? If you can, yeah, you should. But you'll be surprised how fast just a handful of people can start to give you some really good feedback. You'll get sort of the same thing keeps coming up multiple times. Like, oh, okay, great. Maybe we should rethink that. I love what's called hallway usability. This is frequently for interfaces, but this is just like stopping somebody in the hallway at work, on the way to class, in a coffee shop, whatever, and asking if they'll take 5 minutes and look at your thing.
And when you do that, you just put the device in their hand and you say, here, please look at this.
You could say something like, I'm trying to build a travel app and I need to get your feedback, but don't tell them exactly what to do, right? Kind of just put it there. And that's actually part of the reason that we put kids and strangers there. Kids are not supposed to talk to strangers. That's not what we're saying. What we are saying is that kids actually tend not to have a filter. And in this case, that's a really, really good thing. Because they will tell you exactly what they think about something. Whereas most of us, well, at least me, right? I'm in Minnesota nice. I can't tell anybody what I actually think. I've got to be passive aggressive and all that kind of stuff. Maybe Mike, you have a different experience in in Arizona. But kids are really, really good at this. They're really good at just telling you what's going on. And it's kind of a nice thing. Another sort of pro tip here is use and abuse video. All of us walk around with devices that take video all the time. Try to record people using something. If you're doing a remote version of a Q&A on your portfolio or on your prototype, record the screen sharing. Try to get multiple different perspectives and different angles if you can. If you happen to have access to something like a usability lab where there's one-way glass and a whole bunch of recordings, get those recordings, because I guarantee you that you will not remember everything that you find out, especially if you're doing like the hallway usability thing. Right.
It's worth mentioning there are plenty of services now available, especially for our mobile UI, for instance, and web UI that allow you to test remotely. They provide all the video recordings for you. They'll even provide the random users for you at different demographics. So, of course, those things all cost money, but less money than you'd think. And some of these small investments early can really add up as huge resources later.
But we didn't say this very clearly, but we should, is that all the stuff you learn now saves you a lot of time, energy, or money down the road. And sometimes heartache, because a lot of this is how you find out that the idea that you thought you had that was amazing might not be as amazing as you thought. And a tiny pivot makes it a lot better.
So that kind of doesn't segue, but it kind of gives me segues into something I was thinking about is all of these researchings and things that we've learned have value long-term. When we are talking to the VC about our product, we tell them how we validated it and the things that we've learned. All of these tools that we've used throughout prove that we have done the research and that we know that the decisions we've made are correct, or as correct as they can be. Nobody ever knows for sure, of course.
Right. And I think that's sort of the important next piece, right? Is that these things are important. Something that I see skipped over a lot is even if people do this step, they don't talk about it. They don't evangelize it. They don't share what it was that they learned. That could mean sharing it with your team. If there's a bunch of you working on something, it could mean sharing it with your users or with somebody who wants to fund your idea. But actually not just saying, here's the data, actually sharing what you learned, telling a story, telling people what's going on and why, or what you noticed, right? I watched 5 people use this thing, and it turns out that none of them knew where the camera button was. Maybe we should rethink how we do this. And then that last one, we're going to sort of leave you with this. This is not a one-off. You should probably be doing this over and over and over again. Which is great for our next slide, because that's all about questions. But Mike, I got a question for you. How do you know when you should stop doing it over and over and over again?
Wow, that's a hard one. I think we probably start to use some of our decision-making frameworks, and we identify if we have got to the point where we're accomplishing any of our goals. We've hopefully, through proper planning, we've established the decision criteria and the things that we're trying to answer in our research. I guess if we find the answer to our research, or we discover that we're not able to find the answer, no matter. But that's a tough one. Good question. I don't know.
I think, for me, I usually find that I have when I start, I have a lot of questions, and I like to put them into buckets. Like how important is it to answer this question? You're going to have some questions that are make or break, right? If you don't answer this question, you can't move forward. And you're going to have other questions that if you can't answer them, you can move forward, but you might not be as efficient or, as unique as you want to be. Typically, when I feel like I've answered those really big picture questions and I've checked off all the ones on the list, that's when I feel like I'm ready to start actually making something. Which everybody should tune in next time, because that's what we're going to talk about, is the actual making at that point. We would love to take questions if you have them. Either put them in the chat or put them in the chat, I guess. While we're doing that, we have both the decision frameworks that Mike talked about is up there, and then a lot of people ask me, well, what do you use to make prototypes? There's a couple tools listed there. So you've probably heard of Figma and Envision, maybe Adobe XD. Those are great tools. That animation I showed at the beginning to make interfaces where buttons click and screens move around. Those are great tools for that. When you're at the prototyping stage, don't be afraid to use things like Zapier or Bubble or kind of these like no code, low code tools. Because your goal is to wire things together in a lot of cases. Right? Your prototype should feel like duct tape. And the reason for that, all these things exist to make it structurable and to give you that stuff. Mike had a slightly expensive Google Cloud Platform and Firebase lesson, but I think the important point is, Mike, you said like $50. You didn't spend the however many hundreds of thousands to get enough GPUs in a space to make those decisions or, power the servers or whatever it was. So in the grand scheme of things, those are actually pretty good ways to start to learn about those things. And then I personally have been getting a lot into things like, electronics and cases and like that camera. So there's a bunch of cool tools in maker spaces and places like that that can give you access to electronics prototyping, physical objects, containers, holders, spacers, whatever words you want to put in there.
So we have 3 minutes. We should leave any time for questions if we have any.
Yep. So thank you to both of you for presenting us some amazing information in today's session. It was really interesting to learn about how we should try taking the decision and how we can use the decision framework to make sense of all of the ideas and the feedback we get and try to just choose that one idea or make the decision to go forward, because really people can get stuck and have that decision paralysis about what decision should we take, and they may just give up. But having these guidelines and frameworks will really help people with that. And I just had one question, was that what are some good tips that you guys have for asking some good questions to the users and the stakeholders for the feedback? Because you may just show them the product and be like, hey, how's it? And they may just say some positive or kind of neutral things. And if you tell them please be honest, they may just turn into a critical mode and they may just criticize you, because when we say the please be honest, it kind of triggers people and gives them the idea that they should criticize it. So how do we ask the right questions?
I got a couple of these, Mike. But
No, you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
I'm interested to hear your answer.
Always ask open-ended questions. Right? If somebody can give you a one-word answer, it's not a useful question and you won't get anywhere. But also, I don't actually like asking questions. I actually prefer to give people a task and then watch them try to complete it. In our case, right, the task might be identify which Pez dispenser, give them a sheet of Pez dispensers and say, these are the ones you own. How do you identify which ones are yours in the system, in this thing that we made? Right. And then you just sit back and watch, because that's where all the actual learning comes in. You find out when somebody is scratching their head or when they're clicking on the thing that you kind of thought was super obvious and it's not. I'm so guilty of that all the time. But putting the way you answer those questions is by putting people in the position to not answer questions, right? It's giving them an environment or a context or a structure, and then just turning them loose and watching what happens. All the psychology people out there are kind of they're cringing right now, but that's how all of psychology works here, right? You're just observing people in that environment. But yeah, that's a great question.
So I think Edge has one question, and then we'll end on that.
Yeah. So you guys talked a lot about how prototyping should be done and what should be focused on. But what should the time frame look like from the brainstorming stage to what you think is the perfect idea, and then making the prototype? Because as you mentioned, it's pretty important for a team to get a physical product out there so that everyone's on the same page. And I know you can get stuck in that brainstorming stage for a long time, just keep coming up with new things, which gets counterproductive to a point. So what should that time frame look like?
So that's a good question. We really haven't laid out the time frame of this process that we're discussing right now. And I think the reason we haven't laid out a process is because it depends. It's variable. It depends on how your time frame for starters. I mean, if we were talking about a weekend hackathon project, then you have hours to go through each of these different cycles. The other thing is you probably will go through multiple parts of these cycles at multiple times. Like if we think about, and I imagine everybody in this room is, knows about Agile. You may go through multiple sprints where you're going through each of these steps for different aspects of your product, or even the same product aspect over and over again. Image classification is going to be a lot. It's going to be really hard. It's going to take a lot of complex thinking about that. So we're probably not going to do that in one sprint, but the login, like Bryce was saying, that's pretty simple. Although that onboarding and login is never simple, but in theory, that could be something we can do closely. So it depends.
I try really hard to remember that perfect is the enemy. It is really the enemy of good in many cases, right? You can spend so much time polishing something. I have been working really hard personally in my own process in life to say, you know what, is my idea there? Am I just adding polish? And this can be from anything from sending an email to building a prototype to brainstorming. But if you stop and if you say, you know what, I'm just tweaking the same idea, stop brainstorming on it and start making something, right? If you're finding out that, wow, I cannot for the life of me figure out the Google search for solving this problem or making this thing, you may have answered your question there, right? You may have gotten more feedback than you think, even if you didn't build that amazing object that you were hoping to build. So I think a lot of it is just realizing when you're adding pointless polish. And I think also remembering that in many cases, it doesn't have to be perfect for somebody to engage with it or want it or to find it useful.
So I know we didn't directly answer your question, and that's because there isn't an easy answer. But it is worth mentioning that you should think about time boxing these things. So we have talked about this. We talked about it a lot in the brainstorming thing. But at the beginning of your process, you should kind of think through, now that you're starting to understand what the process is and the various steps, you should think about how long it's going to take to get to the end, and then kind of time box, because you definitely in this step in particular will get stuck in decision paralysis, which
and this is an answer that nobody wants to hear, but sometimes if you have an investor, this is really easy, right? You're going to run out of money at a certain point. So if you haven't made it through all of these steps at that point in the future, right, it's usually pretty easy to predict when that is, you're in a lot of trouble. So sometimes you can kind of work backward from that and just say, well, I literally got 2 weeks or this thing falls apart. Well, you better stop brainstorming on, day 3 instead.
It's worth mentioning that one of the decision frameworks that we didn't talk about, I don't necessarily have the name of it up, but one of those decision frameworks is actually designed to allow you to build backwards from a solution and figure out some of the decisions you need to make to actually fulfill the requirement, which is kind of different than the solution we provided, which was kind of building up to a solution. So there are different ways that you can help manage that, getting that solution and getting that decision made. But again, these frameworks that all these smart people created that we're just exposing you to, like Eisenhower. So I think we should end so that we're not going too far over our stream and we keep this worthwhile.
Yep.
But thank everybody for definitely coming to the live stream, and we appreciate your participating and asking questions and just being here with us.
Yep. Thank you so much, Mike and Bryce. We really learned a lot of things through this session, especially about like how we should try building a low-tech prototype and just fail early rather than going all out and just know that you just wasted the time, the product wasn't needed in the market. So these are some really good tips. And for everyone who's watching us, 2 weeks from now, we have our last session, the reality of making it real. That's the final and the climax session. Yeah, you can see the ticker that's going down there. It has the information about the session and the date. So we are really excited to have you guys join us again on December 16th. So thank you everyone for joining us here, and thank you, Mike and Bryce.
Thanks for having us.
Thank
We will
you,
see
yeah.
you in 2 weeks.
Yep, bye everyone.